very first mental health topic day. Well, bam. Okay, now I unfortunately have to type with a mouse, or have to draw with a mouse. What I want you to think about, for those of you that are playing along at home, and this is of interest to you, what I want you to think about is, think about a skill that you would like to learn. Or that you have learned. You could do that too. But like, think about a skill. Like, if you ever thought to yourself like, oh, I would love to like learn how to play guitar, or I would love to learn how to be more effective of a communicator. I would love to be able to whistle. Whatever skill, think of a skill. Okay, like you could think about, you could be reading, spelling, like if you're thinking about kids, you know, talking, learn to look like Dr. Mick. All right, Lowbro. I kind of want to learn to look like you, dude. You got the facial hair I always wanted, man. It's not something that you're necessarily like born with. It's something you might have a propensity for it, but it's like a learned some type of behavior that you want to learn. What learning theory posits is that with the right amount of support, whether it be from others, whether it be from our like kind of our own talents, whether it be from like resources that we have available to us, that with the right mixture of resources and external guidance, we have the ability to acquire skill in various ways. And that we have to basically move through a process in order to be able to gain these skills. You don't just spontaneously gain a skill generally. If you do something for the first time, like I think of a really beautiful example is, so I play a lot of golf. Allie, my fiance, never played golf, but Allie played softball. She played college softball. First time I took Allie out to play golf, her swing had a whole bunch of softball elements in it because she had to borrow from something that she had learned prior. She hadn't learned how to swing a golf club, right? And it's amazing. It pissed me off because Allie's like so naturally gifted athletically that like she's already really good at golf and she's only been playing for like 2 years. It's amazing, but that's beside the point. So one of the things that we think about in terms of development, and what I think is really important for all of you to understand about development, is that spontaneous development is not something that is really predictable. You can't rely on the idea that you're just all of a sudden going to be good at something. We have to learn a skill. So if you think to yourself like, oh, hey, like, you know what? I'm gonna pick up a guitar tomorrow, and when I pick up my guitar, I'm gonna be able to play Stairway to Heaven exactly how Jimmy Page did. Like, there might be one person or a couple people in this entire planet that maybe have the dexterity and the ability to pick that up and do it, but the idea that you're going to spontaneously be able to develop into that space, rare. So, if you go into learning a skill thinking that you're going to be good at it right away, you're already at a disadvantage. If you go into a class thinking that you're going to understand all the materials that are in the class right away, you are already basically priming yourself to not do very well. And that's exactly right, Laura. Like they think, and I think I would add to say that, like, I think that, yeah, the issue is that they think that they're going to be great at it soon. I mean, I showed you guys a while back what my stream looked like when I first started it. Like, this stream has come a long way, and I'm sure that as I continue to do this, it's going to get better in other ways because I'm continuously learning how to do this more effectively. Okay, so learning builds upon itself. So what I want to draw as a way to really simply understand this first before I go into like other assumptions and stuff is, what I want you to do is think about whatever skill that you are thinking about. All right. And I want you to think about this target that I'm drawing. And so if you want to draw this for yourself, you totally can. So this is our target, okay? This is our skill. So think about this as being like, this is the bullseye, right? This is the outer rim. So right now, if you think about a skill that you do not currently have, what we do is we think about this space right here, okay? This is what you, the learner, okay? You are the learner today. This is what the learner cannot do. Okay, so right now, I'm going to use the example I'm going to use for myself is skateboarding. I don't know how to skateboard. I can't, like, I'll just going to use skateboarding. Okay, doing a kickflip. There we go. Doing a kickflip for me. I cannot do a kickflip. Whatever skill that you thought of, okay, right now you want to think of it as like it's something that you currently cannot do. This, not a bad thing. It's okay that you can't do it. It's all right. It's totally fine that you can't do the skill because we wouldn't expect you to be able to do a skill until you start learning the skill. So when people get all up in arms about the fact that they cannot do something, and it's a skill that they have the ability to learn, then if I'm a therapist and I'm working with people around change or like some skill that they want to build, I'm going to be really empathic to them, but I'm also going to be working then with their emotional experience before we're even going to start talking about the skill, because people need to be able to identify, again, your limitations. And so you need to be able to understand that just because you can't do something doesn't mean that you have some kind of character flaw. It just means that you haven't learned how to do it yet. Okay? So I never would have been able to do the transition between scenes from going from Destiny to this if I hadn't already learned how to do it prior. Like if this was my first ever stream, you could never expect me to do what I'm currently doing. Okay? Or at least I wouldn't expect it of myself. So what that means is that we need to be more empathic towards ourselves when we don't know how to do something, and to really give ourselves some patience and grace for the fact that we have not figured out how to do whatever the skill is. So if I really desperately wanted to learn how to do a kickflip, I have to be empathic towards the fact that I cannot do a kickflip. Okay, so I'm just gonna put over here empathy. Okay, empathy for yourself, super important. Okay, be empathic towards the fact that you cannot do the thing yet. And if you're a teacher, recognize that when you have a learner that walks into your space, they don't necessarily have that understanding. So I'm actually using some of what I'm talking about as I'm talking about this with all of you. I am assuming at this point that everybody who's sitting in this chat can't teach about learning theory. Now, I know that there are some of you in here that know learning theory and probably learned it at some point, and that's okay. But like for the most of you, you probably haven't been exposed to this, or maybe it's very limited. So I'm going to assume that at this point, you wouldn't really be able to talk about or understand learning theory. And so that's why I'm here, okay? In the middle of this circle, okay, right here, is what the learner is able to do unaided. So if we use the example of a kickflip for me, if I'm skateboarding and I'm trying to learn how to do a kickflip, my goal in the learning process is to get to this point. I want to get to the point where I can do a kickflip without any aid, okay? Or like if you're riding a bike, being able to ride a bike without training wheels, okay? But like, say like, if I'm trying to learn how to do a kickflip, I might need multiple people to tell me how to do it. I'm gonna need people to show me how to do it. I'm gonna need examples. I'm gonna need to feel what it's like under my feet. I'm gonna need to know the part of the skateboard to push on, like all of that stuff, right? But my goal is that eventually I will be able to do a kickflip unaided, so I can do it by myself, and I can do it very consistently by myself. Whatever the skill that you came up with in this, as part of this endeavor, like your ultimate goal will probably be that I want to be able to do X unaided, so that your goal is to be here. And so what goes along with this, before I get to the next part, is in learning theory terms, what we have here is what's called actual development and potential development. I apologize for how bad my handwriting is, okay? Okay, so at any given point, actual development equals where you are. Potential equals where you could go. So we have actual levels of development and potential levels of development, okay? This is our current capabilities, okay? So no matter where you are in this process of moving from here to here, your actual level of development is where you are, or where the other person you're trying to teach is, okay? And the potential development is where you can go with the support of others. Hello, Kaladnar. Good to see you, okay? And so we're always being mindful of this. So when we have to engage in something new, we have to understand that we're going to be moving through this process. Actual development is going to be changing, and it's going to get closer to what our potential levels of development are. What we have then from a learning perspective and where we want to operate within when we're teaching or when we are learning is in this place which Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. Okay, and that's this entire space right here. Okay, so erase this. And what the zone of proximal development says is what people can do with guidance. All right, so let's say it again. This is what you can do with guidance. So where I start off not being able to do a thing, and my goal is to be able to do the thing unaided, then the space between when I move in this direction of not being able to do it at all to being able to do it unaided is I'm going to need a level of guidance. Okay, and so Bloody, where your mom asked that question, this is where this comes in. Okay, is you could never expect that a person who has never seen a road before in this circumstance to know that there's a hole there that they have to be careful of, especially if they had never driven before. If it was your first time driving, if you had no understanding of what driving is and you didn't know how roads work or that roads could have holes, what we would expect is that person's going to drive into the hole. Okay, unless they're able to use something they've learned about, like obstructions being dangerous, as a way to like make sense of what's happening there, of a novel circumstance. But you don't learn that there's a hole in the road or that you can go around the hole unless you have some degree of guidance, whether somebody tells you that there's a hole in the road that you have to avoid, whether somebody shows you that there's a hole in the road that you have to avoid, like that kind of thing. Okay, so we need guidance. And the thing is about this guidance, okay, is that this happens in layers. And so I'm going to do my best to draw this, okay? This happens in layers. So what happens is we start off by having and you can imagine this going around the entire circle, okay? What happens is this starts off by having us where the teacher is more involved in helping the learner, okay? So I'm trying to think of the best way for me to drive this. Like, drive this. Got cars on the brain, okay? So the teacher is going to help a significant amount and is going to be very involved, okay? And so what this might mean if I'm learning to be a kickflip is I'm going to get a lot of stuff involved in my understanding of how to do a kickflip. I'm going to watch a ton of YouTube videos. I'm going to find somebody who knows how to do a kickflip. I'm going to watch a bunch of people do kickflips. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. And when I go to do my first kickflip, a person might even like put their hands on my feet to show me where the pressure needs to be, right? I might have somebody, you know, give a little boost to the skateboard to help me be able to jump up. Like, if you think about a kid learning how to read, a teacher at the beginning is often going to do most of the reading, okay? And so then when the kid starts to use, over time, starts to learn different words, they start to be able to do the reading by themselves. So think about it. Like, if any of you have ever read with a child who is still learning how to read, think of how many times that child stops reading because they don't know the word. So you have to say the word for them. Okay, so you're effectively doing a lot of the reading and showing them how to put words together and how to say words. Well, over time, as the child learns what those words sound like and what they are, you become, as the learner, or as the teacher starts to become less involved. So you start to get a little bit more mixture of learner and teacher. Okay? And so then over time, what we do is, and this is what's called, well, I'll explain this in a second. So then what happens is we get eventually to the point where we have very minimal involvement from the teacher. And then all of a sudden I can do this unaided. So again, just for illustrative purposes, as we learn, we move from more teacher involvement toward less teacher involvement until we can do the skill unaided. Okay. Now, what this is called as you're going through the zone of proximal development is scaffolding. And if you think about the way that you build a building, is you have to build. So let's say this is our foundation here, okay, for our building that we're going to build. You have to put structures up like this, right? So that all the workers can get here so that you can start to build your building, okay? So you build the building, and let's say you build the first layer of the building, okay, that goes up this high. Well, then what happens is the workers come in and they build new scaffolding this way, right? They come in, they build new scaffolding, and then what they do is they remove, oops, that didn't work very well. They remove or they stop using that scaffolding because it's no longer needed. My thing's not going to allow me to erase this properly. But then we build the next layer of the building. And then what happens is, after that, then what we do is we say, okay, well, we have one more. We have to build in a little bit more scaffolding so that we now have the top of the building. And we now have our building. And then what we do is we remove the scaffolding because it's no longer needed. Oops. That building can now stand on its own, unaided. Okay? So you're the building in this case. Your skill is the thing that's being built. And the teacher or the aides are the scaffolding. So there's a couple things that we need to keep in mind when we're going through what's called instructional scaffolding. One is that you're not going to spontaneously move through this, okay? Two is that research actually shows developmentally that people are able to complete tasks or gain skills within a group a lot faster than they're able to do it on their own. So when you have the assistance of people or of a group to help you with a task, you are more likely to be able to gain that skill and do it unaided quicker than if you are trying to do it completely on your own. So what we have to do is we have to realize that, like, in order for us to move through this space more efficiently, we should be surrounding ourselves with people who have more knowledge about the thing, because who have already learned a significant amount about the skill, because they can impart that knowledge as a way to help us synthesize it while we're moving in this direction. Okay, so this is why right now, like, I have a level of expertise having a PhD in human development, where I've done a lot of work with understanding learning and reading about it and teaching about it and understanding it, that my knowledge about learning theory is what is allowing you guys to now gain knowledge about learning theory, because I have a degree of expertise in this. If I'm going to learn a kickflip, I'm going to go to people who know how to do a kickflip, who are more knowledgeable about a kickflip. I'm not going to go to somebody who skis to ask them how to do a kickflip. I'm not going to go ask my mom how to do a kickflip because my mom doesn't know how to do a kickflip. My mom doesn't skateboard. Okay? So, like, you want to make sure that you're around people that have more knowledge, which is why I say it's really important for people to be very clear and open about where it is that their knowledge is coming from. You should be able to articulate where it is that you're pulling this from. This can't just be like willy-nilly bullshit, stuff that I either agree or don't agree with. This is stuff that's been long in the stream of how people learn, okay? So, again, we complete tasks a lot better in groups and a lot more efficiently in groups than we do on our own, okay? So, and I mean, some of this is dependent upon how ready a person is to learn a skill, all right? But if you get hung up, fingers bleeding, if you get hung up on the idea that you should be able to spontaneously learn, you are at a disadvantage up front. How do you vet the resources efficiently to not be wasting time on poor resources? Oh man, that gets really tricky, Fluid. I mean, you basically have to kind of like use your judgment, see if the resource is something that is endorsed by people that you trust or people that seem to be widely considered to be an expert. It's not too complex, Fluid. You can ask questions, but it's hard to vet what's a poor resource from what's a good one, which is why we have things like credentials and why we have things like degrees and education and letters and stuff, because I have a PhD. Does that mean that I am the best at teaching learning theory? Maybe not. I could be a complete hack, but there's probably a good chance that I know what I'm talking about and I'm trying to act ethically. Okay. It is, Bloody. I mean, that really is. Okay. So, all right. So a couple things about instructional scaffolding. There's actually 3 phases that exist as it relates to scaffolding. And when we're trying to think about what's called strategic learning, okay. And strategic learning is basically just this process, but it's in the spirit of us being able to facilitate a level of self-regulation around a skill. So at this point, when I play my guitar, I can tell whether I am, playing well or if I'm not playing well. And like, I can kind of self-regulate myself around learning the guitar, although I need to take lessons if I want to get more advanced than I am. Okay, anything like that. A kickflip. What am I doing to be able to self-sustain myself in my ability to do a kickflip? Because the thing that happens is if instructors don't back off, or if guidance doesn't back off over time, if you don't remove the scaffolding, the learner is going to continue to be over-reliant upon the resources. So if I can only read how do I want to put this? So here's an example, language acquisition. Okay, so if you're a parent and you've got kids, or if you plan to be a parent someday and your kids are starting to learn a language, what can happen sometimes, Hoffman, hello dude, I'm really glad that you stopped by, man, and I appreciate the sub. Happy stream, baby, man. Okay, so think about language acquisition. So what happens is the parents have to talk more for a kid when they don't have language. That's just inherently what happens. But what we want eventually is for a human being to be able to use their own words to be able to ask for their needs using language, right? Kids will ask for their needs to be met when they're newborns by crying, but then eventually when we have language acquisition, we have a more nuanced way of being able to dictate what our needs are. So we would want that kid to be able to use that language eventually and to use it on their own. Well, what can happen is the teacher, in this case the parents, might sometimes become over-involved with their scaffolding and will not remove scaffolding, and thus will continue to speak for their child even after they gain language, which can actually start to stifle a child's ability to use language to get their needs met, because what they learn is that their parents will speak for them, that their parents will get their needs met for them, that they do not need to use their words. And so as a parent, when your kid's learning language, what you really want to be mindful of is you really want to be mindful of the fact that, like, yes, you can speak for your child, but as your child starts to learn language, you should be slowly removing yourself from that situation to allow the child to move closer to their potential level of development. Now, you can also move too fast here. So you could have a parent that says immediately to a child who starts learning a few words like, okay, well, you're only going to get something if you ask me, and that child's not going to get their needs met because that's moving too quickly. So the idea of moving through the zone of proximal development is that you are slowly taking away teacher aid so that the learner can begin to move towards their ability to do something unaided. So a couple little points. So first of all, this space here, the zone of proximal development, I make a very important point about this. Moving from here to here is anxiety provoking and causes a lot of stress for people. Learning a skill is not all pleasant. This is huge, and an acknowledgement of this on both the teacher and the learner's part is deeply important, okay? When people learn, they get stressed out. When people learn, they get anxious. Learning a skill is not something that you feel great about all the time. So when I was learning how to play golf, I got frustrated. When I learned how to play guitar, I got frustrated. When I learned how to be a therapist, I got frustrated. When a child learns how to talk, they get frustrated. You know, the first time you tell a kid, hey, use your words. I know you want cookies, but use your words. Tell me you want a cookie. And the kid goes like, and they get really frustrated. Good. It's okay to be frustrated. We learn distress tolerance through learning. Like you have to be able to fight through some of the discomfort of this and be able to understand that it's going to be uncomfortable. The only reason I point this out to you guys is because if you ever want to learn a new skill, and by the way, alternative self-talk is a skill. All right. So when I say things to you guys like tell yourself you matter, if you're not used to doing that, like having compassionate self-talk is a skill. It's not something that we take for granted. Okay. When I'm helping clients or when I'm talking to people in general and I'm talking about engaging in a level of self-talk that is compassionate towards yourself, and that's not something you're used to doing, it's something you have to learn how to do. There will be frustration in that because maybe you don't think you're doing it right. Maybe you're not entirely sure how to do it. You're not like, and so I say the motto every single night because I believe in non-judgmental repetition, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But like, eventually my hope would be that if I'm not on one night, you could tell yourself I matter, my experiences are valid, and I won't let anybody tell me otherwise without my aid. Okay, so it's the same kind of thing. Toleration of the anxiety and stress on both the learner and the teacher's account is what is going to facilitate a quicker move through that space. And what we don't often talk about when we talk about learning theory is the anxiety and stress of being the teacher, because what we often focus on is, okay, well, the learner is going to be really frustrated while they go through this. Well, it may be frustrating for the teacher as well, and it's going to be anxiety provoking for the teacher as well. And so teachers need to be able to be aware that their learner is going to get frustrated, and that if you compound the frustration by putting on pressure, you're probably not doing a good job. What probably needs to happen is you need to pay attention to, am I over or under involved in the scaffolding of this learning endeavor? If you're moving to a space where your child needs to learn how to use their words to get their needs met, and you start to get frustrated because your child won't use their words, then the thing that you really want to pay attention to and ask yourself as the teacher or as the parent is, am I speaking too much for my child? So am I over involved right now in their ability to use language? Do I have too much scaffolding up? Or do I have too little scaffolding up? Have I not really set my child up to be successful in using their words in order to get their needs met? And if not, can I put some extra scaffolding up? So and we do this inherently, but it's really important to be able to do this consciously. Maybe you ask a certain question. So I kind of did that in my example. So if this kid's not using their words and I say, hey, we talked about this. When you have something that you want, you point to it and you say, I want. Do you remember that? And then they might go, oh yeah, I want. So instead of me doing their job for them by just taking the cookie jar off the shelf and handing it to them because I know that's what they want, I have instead showed the child, all right, there needs to be a little bit more involvement from me in showing the kid how to do this, and then they will do it. They will do the skill. Again, just really important to realize that like this is going to be stressful. So what we see sometimes with parents is they'll see their kid get stressed when they're having to use a new skill, if they're having to do their homework that they're not very good at, if they're having to use their words, if they're having to use the bathroom, like when you're potty training, okay? When the kid gets distressed learning that skill, it's totally normal. Like, it's totally normal. If a kid gets to the point that they're dysregulating, it may just mean that there's not enough scaffolding for them to learn the skill. And then just be mindful that as the child learns the skill, we remove it. And that goes with any skill that we're learning, any one of us. So when we're confronted with a new skill, what happens a lot of the time is we have to interpret what is required in order for that skill to be gained. And a lot of times what we do is we draw from our own personal experiences in terms of like how we learn a thing how do we learn a thing. So if John Mayer is the only guitarist that I ever watched in my entire life, I'm going to think that I have to play guitar exactly like John Mayer does. I'm going to think that in order for me to push the low E string down, I have to use my thumb. Okay? which may be limiting to me, because if I don't have enough support in terms of learning the guitar from seeing other guitarists, from having a guitar teacher, then at that point there might be somebody who says, no, you could totally use like your other fingers for the low E string, that's fine. To where I now have like more of an expertise that allows me to be able to learn the guitar more effectively and maybe find what works best for me. The other thing is, when we're trying to figure out what a skill is and how to learn it, the interpretation of that skill, or the interpretation of the strategies that are being used to accomplish that task, is hugely important. If the learner and the teacher misalign on their interpretation of the task or of the skill, then that's going to cause a whole bunch of problems. So if you're the teacher in a given circumstance, it needs to be very clear what it is that you're trying to convey so that people interpret it properly. Kind of one of the other parts I want to say about this is, as we're moving through this space, depending on what the skill is that you're trying to learn. Okay, cool. Thank you, Staircase. Timothy Lee. There needs to be an establishment of a context of mutual understanding of a given skill. And so if we don't do a good job as teachers establishing the context under which this skill is being learned, people will not gain the skill very well, because they don't understand why they are learning it. So when I teach classes at Northwestern, I am constantly explaining to students why they are learning what they're learning, because if you don't do that, then people get lost in the weeds. They come at it from their own inductive way of understanding what it is that they're learning, and they could be completely off base. And if you don't have a shared context for understanding under which you are learning something, then you are screwed, both as a learner and as a teacher. And you also need to be able to do this in understandable terms that the learner can understand and can actually gravitate towards and have a sense of, okay? The teacher provides a level of expertise. They also provide feedback that regulates the acquisition of skill. But ultimately, we want to move a learner towards the place where they can do the skill on their own. Scaffolding is really, it's a collaborative task, and it takes place in the zone of proximal development. And the last point that I'm going to make before I put it up for questions and stuff for us to kind of continue the discussion is, what the most effective way to move people from point A to point C here through point B is to use what's called, and this is huge, this is so important, non-judgmental repetition. So what non-judgmental repetition is it's the idea that as a learner is engaging in the anxiety and the stress of a learning endeavor, they're going to need some level of repetition of scaffolding, of resource, of information, of expertise, of knowledge, that the teacher is tasked with needing to deliver that repetition of information non-judgmentally. Because if you have judgmental repetition, that stifles learning, because it creates a level of pressure, and it also exacerbates the anxiety of the learning. And so what some of you may have noticed is that, like, I try to use this a lot, which is like, if you ask a question multiple times, like, I will answer it multiple times, and I'll try to do it in such a way that I'm not an asshole to you. Like, and so if students are struggling, or a learner is struggling with some part of learning, what we want to do is be able to reinforce the new skill or the scaffolding in such a way that they don't experience a level of judgment. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I am going to now, because I really think maybe it'll help. Okay, so there are 3 parts to moving through learning. Okay, there's 3 phases. Okay, so when we want to go to learn a new task, we have to be able to prepare for whatever the task is. So what this means is we have to analyze the task. We have to analyze the task. Okay, so what is the task? What is a kickflip? What is this skateboard trick that I'm trying to do? We have to activate our goals. So I need to know what I'm moving toward, and I need to be thinking in terms of like goal orientation. So I want to be able to do a kickflip, and maybe I want to be able to do a kickflip by the end of the summer. Or I want to be able to do it well enough that I can do it kind of on my own unaided, right? We need to be able to set our goal and know what that goal is. So that's part 1. And it helps if you work with a person to do this, who has expertise to be able to tell you what is a proper prep for what it is that you're trying to do. Okay. 2, then we have performance of the task. So this is where we actually engage in doing it, okay? So we engage in the task, but while we do this, we are monitoring and controlling our progress. Ideally, when we are monitoring our progress, this goes from external to internal. And what I mean by this, I'm going to be looking for feedback from the resources that have more expertise. And I'm going to take their feedback on my ability to learn this. And then I'm going to move that into my internal experience as opposed to using my own internal feedback. And so what I mean by this is like, if I'm trying to work my way towards being able to do a kickflip, and I think to myself as I'm moving through the process, I'm like, God, like this is just not going well. I'm going way too slow. I can't seem to figure this out the proper way. This is really frustrating. But then the expert who I'm with, like maybe my skateboarding teacher, says, no, you're exactly where you need to be, man. Like that was really cool the way that you were able to get the board off the ground. And I would expect that that's about where you would be at this point in time. It's being able to monitor the progress of that from external to internal. So basically giving the teacher a bit of an ability to provide the feedback on whether the task is moving along towards mastery in the way that would be expected by somebody who has the expertise to know that, if that makes sense. We have to, this is a part that people forget about frequently, is appraisal of it, okay? And so what this means is, can we figure out ways to regulate our ability to learn the task? And can we adapt? Can we think about, oh man, my writing's getting worse. Can we adapt to future performance? Okay, so can I basically prepare myself to gather more skill or to be more able to do the thing that I'm trying to do? Okay, and again, we want this to go as best it can from external to internal. So if you can do these three things while you're trying to learn a task, and you can keep in mind the fact that, again, what's really important, cannot emphasize this enough, is that learning is stressful, and that's okay, you're probably going to be in a pretty good space. This is the stuff, so I teach this to therapists as part of my human development course, but I teach this to therapists because when I'm doing therapy, when any therapist is doing therapy, we're basically doing this. We're helping people learn. We're helping people learn and implement new skills. And so one of the things that has made, I think, some of my therapy be more successful over the years is really taking time to think about the way that learning theory can be applied to moving people through the tasks of therapy. So for example, if a couple comes to me and says, we want to be able to communicate better, we want to communicate more effectively, more openly with our feelings, then I'm taking that and I'm looking at whatever that sequence will be as a new skill and something that they eventually need to be able to do unaided. And so this is where I say, as a therapist, I'm trying to work myself out of a job because I want people to be able to engage in what they've learned in therapy without me. But I'm happy to scaffold that process because they need my help, they need my involvement up front, really playing traffic cop with their interaction patterns. And then over time, I start to remove myself from that so that they can implement it and eventually go home and not need me in order to do it. So this is super relevant to therapy. Jess, why does it take a brick wall to fall on her head to learn instead of learning things with love and laughter? That's a really interesting question. It could just be that there's never, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer. My best guess could be that that's just, you know, we do learn that way sometimes. And sometimes we aren't given the opportunity to have love and laughter be part of the learning process. Sometimes it is harsh. Sometimes it's that we have to learn something out of necessity and not necessarily because we want to. And sometimes it's a kind of a harsh truth, which really sucks. But I hope that you get to have more instances of being able to learn through love and laughter at some point. And I think part of that starts with truly the acknowledgement. And I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but truly with the acknowledgement that anxiety and stress is part of the learning process, and this is okay. I hope this was cool. Like, I hope you like this. I hope this was helpful.